Our next speaker is Kenneth Helphand, and I'll just be reading his bio as he's able to get his presentation up. So Kenneth is Philip H. Knight Professor of Landscape Architecture Emeritus at the University of Oregon, where he has taught courses in landscape history, theory, and design since 1974. He is a graduate of Brandeis University and Harvard's Graduate School of Design. He is the author of multiple award-winning books, including his newest title, HOPS, Historic Photographs of the Oregon Hopscape. So just a reminder, it looks like as this presentation is getting up and into presentation mode, we have the Q&A box for any questions that might come up in our last 30-minute segment of the day. And just a final reminder to everyone, if you tune out before we're able to say our final thank yous of the day, a final thank you to today's platform sponsor, Rabo AgriFinance. Thank you for helping to make this year's convention possible. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kenneth.
Thank you, Jackie. Is it all working? Good, okay. I'm not a hop grower, I'm not a brewer, I'm not a manufacturer or a supplier. I've been listening to those folks, but I'm a landscape architect and a landscape historian. So thank you for zooming in for, I think it's the last presentation today about my new book, HOPS, Historic Photographs of the Oregon Hopscape. This is the cover. While the book is solely about hops in Oregon, I think you'll see and hear from this story and images that are not just confined to the state, but have parallels with the hops environment everywhere. Some of what I'm going to show you is going to be second nature to you, I'm sure, but hopefully not all. And most of the images that you're going to see have never been published before. This is the title page. I was going to suggest that everyone have a beer while they're watching this, but I've often told folks the book is about hops that flavor beer, but the book is not about beer. There are plenty of books about beer, as you know. I moved to Oregon almost 50 years ago. Actually, from my accent, you can see I'm not from the West. I grew up in New York, but I've lived here most of my life. I moved here to teach landscape architecture at the University of Oregon, and it's when I first encountered hops. Unlike any other agricultural landscape I'd witnessed, I wanted to know more about this landscape and how it came to be, so I began to do some investigation. So my research took me up I-5 to the HOPS archive at Oregon State University that many of you know, and especially to Tia Edmondson Morton, who many of you know, who's the keeper of that archive, and their extraordinary collection of photographs. And that was the genesis of the book, which is a collection of historic photographs beginning in the 1880s and largely ending around 1950. They're almost all, except one or two, in black and white, of what I've named the Oregon Hopscape, my term for the physical environment and the broader culture of hops. However, what I discovered in the research was the culture of the hops environment and the incredible rich relationship of people to that landscape. In the book is organized that has each photograph, full-page photograph, has an accompanying caption, and most of these captions are drawn from amazing oral histories done over the past half century that I'll be quoting from. I'll show you a lot of photographs of the book as I talk, and I'm not going to explain them individually. I'll show many because, in fact, that is, in fact, the heart of the book. So the Sunday Oregonian, the Portland paper, in 1911 said, it was titled, "Hop Picking Time is the gayest, most carefree, easy money time of all the year." And it went on and said, "Poets and story writers have from time immemorial lauded the beauty of the hop fields and flung about them aromatic interest. They deserve all the superlative in the market, for the crop is one of the most beautiful grown. The long vines are festooned from post to post and crowned with clusters of bell-like blossoms, marvelously delicate as to its shadings and wafting as gentle fragrance, grateful to the olfactory sense. The running vines completely embower the slackened wire from which hang pendant myriads of tips and tendrils that wave and beckon in the breezes that sweep across the mountaintops. They appear to be millions of welcoming hands bidding one to come in and join the fun." Not quite the text you get in contemporary newspapers. The book begins, not surprisingly, with the plant that you all know very well. And it's spread through Western Oregon. And then the book traces all the stages of hops production, from the creation of a hop yard or field, through stringing, picking, baling, and drying of hops. This photograph, around 100 years ago, shows most of these stages. You see the poles of the hop yards, you see pickers, you see bales being loaded before they're being brought to the dryer. Of course, you know, the construction of a hop yard is first. These hundreds of poles are raised as a grid in the landscape, creating this incredible geometry on the ground. It is incredibly dramatic and I think rather moving. The book goes on to discuss the history of hop growing going back 5 centuries. And I won't go into that now, but in fact, I discovered there are epic poems in English going back to the 16th century from England of hop growers and hop growing. And I was very interested in the methods of how poles were used. And here you see an example from the 16th century. It traces this migration from Europe to the United States, across the country to the Pacific Northwest, until in the early decades of the 20th century, the Willamette Valley became known as the hops capital of the world. Once poles, as you know, are placed, wires are strung across the poles, and then the string, the twine, is dropped to support the plant. And I love these photographs, the stringers with the string around their necks like great garlands. Beth Monroe, in her description, her father was a manager of the Livesley Hop Yard, which was located just outside of Salem. Livesley, in fact, became the mayor of Salem, and his grand house in Portland ultimately became the governor's mansion. She said in her oral history, "I worked on the hop ranch from the time I was able to go do any outside work at all. When school was out, we started with the training of the hops from the time they came out of the ground. You have to train them around the strings and then take them to the wire. Then my younger brother and I, when we were quite young, rode the sleds. Have you ever seen a hop sled?" And you're looking at one here. "They're drawn by horses, 1 horse per sled. They're probably 6 feet high. We climbed up on a ladder in the back. They went down between the 2 rows and you could train the hops." In the last hour watching the convention here, I watched how much of this now can be done by machine rather dramatically. Of course, the next phase is picking. And before mechanical picking was introduced, as you know, picking was an incredibly labor-intensive enterprise that took 3 to 4 weeks in the fall and needed literally tens of thousands of pickers. This is Independence in 1910, where its population went from 2,000 to 3,000 to over 40,000 during hop picking time. And the ads you'll see here, and you'll see some ads in the presentation, drawn from different Oregon papers trying to get people to work in the hop yards. And there was a special hops picker train from Portland going down to the fields in the valley. Pickers came from all the surrounding areas, all the towns, as well as by trains and boats from Portland. The earliest pickers to Washington State were in fact Indians who came by canoe through Puget Sound. Pickers then went on to live, they either stayed at home if they lived in nearby communities, or they lived in temporary camps that were provided by the growers. This camp is just outside of Eugene. For those of you from Eugene, in fact, if you were on the top of Mount Pisgah, you look down, you would see the entire fields there were hop yards and camps. The photos that you'll see, though, show congregations of individuals, groups posing together, much in the way you'd see in graduation pictures. You'll see pictures in the book of people in pairs, in groups, families, and people representing all walks of life. You can think of a lot of these photographs as environmental portraits, people then in the setting of their activity, often accompanied by the tools of their labor or craft. You see baskets and poles, of course. The landscape is in the background in the picture, and it becomes a subject that's equal to the individuals in the foreground. In an era when painted backdrops were often used as formal portraits in a photographer's studio, the backdrops in these historic photographs is always out of doors with the poles and plants of the hop yard as the backdrop. And if you look close in many of these, there's always a dog, there's children, there's people of all ages, and often with people with a garland of hops wrapped around their head or around their shoulders. This is in the Oregonian, 1907. Hop fields represent one striking contrast to the city. There are no social barriers. Equality is maintained under the leveling action of the weighsman's scales. For the man who weighs your hops is the man who decides your station. Preacher and bootblack, tradesman and farmer, factory hand and college boy pick side by side. It does them all a world of good. The types one meets represent every shade of mankind. Here's a school teacher with a college degree who's seeking health. Across from him is a town tramp earning money to buy beer. Here's the pretty daughter of a well-to-do farmer, the hops in her basket to pay for a pink party dress. A tired, nervous little woman in the opposite row with all the energy of her body in her work. She's raising a mortgage. There are boys whose earnings put them through college and others who are raising money to go to the devil. I can tell you in Eugene, Springfield, every person I know, every friend I mentioned talk about this book, everyone who's over 70 at some point worked picking. These group photographs have a celebratory aspect, and they're a permanent record of the harvest. Betsy Murray in Corvallis began picking at 12, and she said in her history, I picked hops with my mother and younger brother. We got up fairly early in the morning in order to have time to help with so-called chores on the farm, prepare to eat breakfast, pack lunch to take to the hop yard. My father fed and harnessed and hitched up the horse and buggy, all ready for the approximate 4-mile journey to the hop yard. He stayed home and ran the farm as usual. This is my favorite picture of these. I love the multi-generational quality here. People of all ages, there's little babies in the corner, young kids, and then up through the boys playing here with the string with the twine in the foreground, and especially that Walt Whitman look-alike person sitting in his chair. Mary North said the following, I was raised in a large family, so everyone helped out. We'd get up around 5 a.m. and get the younger children dressed and ready for a day in the field. Have breakfast, pack a large lunch. We loaded into a car by 6 a.m. and on our way to the field. We made our work quite competitive to keep it interesting. So there was time for lunch and a break. We'd pick until 4 p.m., depending on how bad the crop needed harvesting. When we got home, there were baths to be taken, dinner to be cooked, many chores, and cleaning to be done. We'd go to bed very tired, but also thinking of another tiring and competitive day ahead. We as young people made many friends from far and wide and look forward to seeing them each day. By the way, here from the Weirich, you see that photograph on the right, 1928. They did many of, there's questions of who took these pictures. Many of these pictures were taken by growers who would do annual, essentially almost yearbook albums of the groups of people picking. There also were postcards printed, which were a sure sign of the significance of hops in the image of the states, in the Northwest, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and other parts of the country, wherever hops were grown. And I suspect many people watching this have their own collections of these postcards. So who picked? Who were the pickers? There were Indians from the nearby reservations and who arrived, you'll see here, in their regalia, which is rather interesting. And all the state's ethnic groups, largely recent immigrants in the Willamette Valley, were represented. So there were Chinese Americans that you see here. There were Swedish Americans. Here, photograph was entitled The Swedes of Yamhill. There were Volga Germans, a group I wasn't familiar with before. There were Armenians. There was the great photographer Dorothea Lang, documented pickers in Oregon and Washington for the Farm Security Administration in 1939 during the Depression. During the war, there were bracero laborers from Mexico. The nuns at Mount Angel picked. There was the Women's Land Army during World War II. These women here in the uniform and numbers of being members of that. There were soldiers from Camp Adair near Corvallis who were pickers. Prisoners of war were pickers as well. Unfortunately, I could get no pictures of them because I was told you were not allowed to take photographs of prisoners. And from Oregon State University, there were co-eds. This picture was entitled Co-eds with Hose. In fact, we went on to learn the names of these women by looking at the OSU yearbooks. They were all members of the same sorority. And these were the first pictures I could find that showed women wearing pants. The work was long and hard, but it was also a social gathering and entertainment in the camp. And many people nostalgically look back upon that. There were movies and frequent dances. And if you look at the program there, it says there was the Hop Yard Quadrille, the Hop Yard Waltz, the Hop Yard Baltimore Hop, these variety of dances. And in fact, I read that there's one of the theories, in fact, that the word hop for a dance came from hop yards originally in the Midwest. Of course, then, the hops are picked, baled, and then brought to drying kilns. At one point, I actually tried to figure out the weight that this horse might be pulling. Before they were sent to breweries, then, of course, around the world to flavor beer. Al Hansen, whose family opened a hop yard in 1925, wrote, "A Czech boss and 2 helpers would weigh the hops after putting them in sacks and punch the tickets. A sack boss would throw the full sacks into the wagon. A field boss was in charge of seeing that all this was done, usually in teams, and drivers would haul the sacks hop to the dryer. At the dryer, 3 men would unload the wagons by the kilns. This was dumping the hops on an elevated floor 20 feet from the ground with burlap covered to blow the heat to get to the hops. The firemen would start the fire in the furnace the floor below. In fact, this took great experience. These people were rather expert because it was rather dangerous activity." He went on and said, after drying the hops for 14 to 18 hours, they would be ready to shove off into the cooling room to cool off, then baled at 200 pounds per bale. He noted the pay scale. Pickers received from 80 cents to 100 pounds to $1.50, and it differed from year to year. Day workers received from 20 cents an hour to 75 cents. He said that kids got between 7 to 18 cents a pound. And in terms of statistics, every 4 pounds of green hops dried to 1 pound, so no one made much money. There are these wonderful celebratory photographs of pickers and growers and workers, and firemen standing on kilns and dryers, here in Lowell on the right. After the harvest, not surprising, there was some festivities. In the 1930s, there was a grand festival in Independence, Oregon, that in fact in the last few years has recently been revived. This is another photograph by Dorothea Lang, and if you look over this man's shoulder, you see above the ad for chewing gum, in fact, it says the Hop Fiesta, and it's listing in August all the events that are associated with it, and then another poster on top of that, as well as ads you see here for Kodak and Coca-Cola. I'm sure that everyone in the audience knows that when you're drinking, much of the flavor of that landscape comes through to you, and hopefully you learn something new from this. I want to thank the Oregon Hop Growers Association. Their generous contribution made possible, in fact, the conceptual quality of the photo reproductions of the book. And to purchase the book, you can go to the website there. It's Oregon State University Press, and they've generously you can enter a promo code and get 30% off on the book right now and free shipping. And actually, in speaking to folks who've already seen this, it is in fact a wonderful gift item for obviously anyone in the world of hops and anyone who drinks beer as well. And there are millions and millions of those. So I gladly answer any questions now, or I listed my email there. Where do I go now?
All right, thank you so much, Kenneth. If people have questions, we have the Q&A box. I've also noticed that we've had Tia Edmondson Morton join us and has put some of her put some links as well in the chat box. I know we've had Tia as a speaker in the past, but this was a really lovely ending to the day and a great presentation. So thank you very much, Kenny. And I don't see any questions popping up at the moment. Oh, we've just got one.
Sure.
How many photos did you review to narrow it down to 85? And that's from Michelle.
I would say thousands. I went to, as I said, this began at the archive at OSU, and they have thousands of photographs. I looked at every single one of those. And then I went to every historical archive in Western Oregon, the Oregon Historical Society. And then I was actually yesterday at Polk County. They have a great archive in Independence, in Salem, in Eugene, the Lane County Historical Society, and all the way down to Grants Pass, which at one time Grants Pass was a major hop growing area. So I looked at thousands of photographs. Some of these interesting, like the archive at OSU and the one in Lane County are incredibly indexed, and you can find them all. Others, the archivists in these places are absolutely wonderful and just kept pulling photographs out from their folders. And she'd say, have you looked at this? Have you looked at that one? And that's why many of the images you'll see here have never been seen by anyone, I think, since they arrived to those folders. And for those who have an interest in photography, the quality, one of my criteria was that the ones I would choose were wonderful photographs in terms of the quality of the photography and the composition and so on. And I think they are. Good question.
Yes, no, certainly some beautiful pictures in there. We've had a few more questions pop up. So the next one is from another Oregon person, Brian Bulldog from Goshi Farms. And he says, throughout your work and research for this book, was there anything in particular that stood out or surprised you? Anything unexpected?
I think once I got into it, what was most surprising was how dramatic this was for the literally tens of thousands of individuals who participated. And that was largely in terms of picking. And how much, particularly in reading oral histories, how much they reflected upon this and how significant it was as an activity. It wasn't, it didn't take a day. It took, almost a month. People would go as families. It was both work and a social occasion. And very much a community occasion. The small towns in the Willamette Valley would essentially empty out, and everyone would be engaged in that. And I found that to be incredibly interesting and surprising and wonderful. In looking at the history, I was amazed at the early history. And the book just briefly in the text deals with that, not in the photographs. The early history, particularly in Great Britain, which was the major hop growing area for a long time, until the early 20th century, of how much there as well, it was equally as much part of the culture. Like Portland, there were trains bringing people down to hop yards in the Willamette Valley. In London, the turn of the 20th century, there were trains taking people down from London down to the hop yards in Kent and Surrey to pick hops. The great writer George Orwell, in fact, wrote an essay about that and joined the hop pickers for one day. So it was the kind of broader culture that surprised me, where my initial interest was the look of the land. I was always, why does this look this way? An orchard looks in a particular way, a vineyard looks one way. Strawberries, each of these things that attract us when we look at the agricultural landscape. And it's still dramatically, yesterday I was driving through the valley, and just now it's the poles, and it's there. I think they make an extraordinary impression on anyone. I describe a hop yard as like a vineyard on steroids.
That is certainly a good way to put it. I like to call hops the high-rise crop. So,
nice term. I should have used that.
You can use it.
Okay,
we've got another question from Kayla Altendorf, our newest USDA hop breeder, and she's wondering, can you touch on the history of the brewing archives at OSU? Who initiated it, why and when, and what percentage of the photographs were you able to attribute to a specific photographer? So,
okay, T, I think T is on. She can give you the history of the archive, because she is the original archivist there and the person who's been responsible, continues to be responsible for expanding it. And her expansion, let me speak for a little, is everything about hops. So it began at OSU because they did the horticultural and biological research of virtually all the species that you're using. You know, Cascade being the most dramatic example of that. So there's information there from the scientific side, from the cultural side, the historical side, material side, and then particularly as craft brewing has grown in the state, of getting information from craft brewers. And if I could make a plea to everyone who's on this, is to archive your material and have it sent to OSU. So there's a permanent record of this for historians and those who want to know the history of this kind of vital crop, really, in the region. How many? I think it was a question about how many. There were thousands of photographs in that archive. Most of those have been donated by different growers, and that continues to expand. And I'd urge, oops, sorry, I'm in the sun here, more people to add to that. And as I went around to different archives, I encouraged the archivists in those places also to make sure that their information goes to the OSU archive, because it is this central repository. And not all, but many of those images are now available online. So you can kind of go there and enjoy yourself.
Okay, wonderful. Well, it looks like that is the remainder of the questions that people had. We did have some more comments to say thank you for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. And just I should add, another pleasure has been meeting folks in this world or this culture, you know, both historically and contemporarily. And again, to the Oregon Hop Growers Association, who were, I had an idea I was going to have to go around to every craft brewer in the state to try and help me fund the book. And then I said, wait a minute, I should go to the hop growers directly. And I ended up being at a meeting of theirs. I did a presentation, and then a couple of weeks later, they said, oh yeah, we'll do it. And that was incredibly generous, and I hope they're happy with the product. Okay.
Certainly a wise move to go directly to the growers.
Exactly, yes.
So thank you again once more to Kenneth Helphand. And once more, the book is Hops, Historic Photographs of the Oregon Hopscape.